doing that, I would like to welcome everybody on here. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you are with us. Are you there, Forrest?
I am here. I am here. I'm here.
Okay.
And I want to welcome people too. I see a lot of names that I haven't seen before. Welcome. It's a nice day here in California, so
Cool.
enjoy the weather. McKinley, he's here. He's still in witness protection.
Hi, Forrest. Happy Sabbath.
Thank you.
Hi, Bronwyn and Dave.
Hi, McKinley.
You know, I think these people will start believing me if I say it enough, McKinley.
Hi, Sue Lewis.
Who?
And Mark, welcome all the way from Alaska.
Hello there.
Hi.
Long time no see for many of us. It's
Yes.
lovely to be on. And
Good
it's
to
just
see
now
you.
light up here. The sun actually showed itself.
Uh-huh.
It's about 20 degrees outside.
At least you're not in the minuses right now.
Well, that's what it's here in Chattanooga, about
Huh.
20 degrees. So
How you
Good
doing,
morning,
Brian?
everybody, and
Well, thank
welcome.
you, Bob.
Yeah.
Welcome very much. We are going to have a good time today, so let's begin. And let's begin with Hebrews chapter 1. That connects our topic today with what the church as a whole is studying this quarter. And this is from the New Revised Standard Version. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. He is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being, and he sustains all things by his powerful word. When he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, "I will be his father, and he will be my son"? And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." Of the angels, he says, "He makes his angels winds and his servants flames of fire." But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever. The righteous scepter is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And in the beginning, Lord, you finished the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like clothing. Like a cloak, you will roll them up. And like clothing, they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will never end. But to which of the angels has he ever said, "Sit at my right hand until my enemies, until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Are not angels spirits in the divine service, sent to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? Therefore, we must pay greater attention to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away from it. Dear God, thank you for another day, another Sabbath, another opportunity to converse. Thank you for Clifford and all that he has been doing for the church over the decades, really. And we're thankful that he spent some time with us this morning. Help us to take good advantage of that time. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Well, I'm really glad to see so many here, but I'm really glad to see Clifford here. We almost didn't get a chance to see him because he had a pretty rough accident. I'll let him tell you about that. We all have our favorite Clifford Goldstein story. Mine is when I was in my office studying some time ago, and the door made some noise as someone was knocking on it, and I opened the door, and here was this completely unkempt person. I thought for sure he had fallen off the train down at the railroad tracks, and I was thinking, how can I get this person up to the social work department of the medical center as soon as possible, because this person really needs some attention. But Clifford kept looking at me and looking at me as though I should recognize him. And indeed, eventually I did. And I invited him, and we had a splendid conversation, as we often have. So he's at the general conference. I'll let him tell you about his work. There at the general conference, Bronwyn worked with him.
Yeah, it was funny. The story with you, with me, that's what happens when I'm away from my wife for a couple days. If my wife had come on that trip, that wouldn't have happened. But just, yes, my office was torn up. We had a leak and they tore up the wall, and I needed to get a fan out of the attic yesterday. And so I'm up there. Don't ask me how I did it, but I stepped the wrong way and went right through the floor, the ceiling, and started to plummet down. Fortunately, a board caught me, so it kept me from going through to the floor below, and I'm thankful for that. But I'm banged up, scraped up a bit, but I'm here and I'm glad, but I am a little achy. But anyway, so that's it.
Yeah, people who step on the ceiling thinking it's a floor and fall to the real floor below have often ended up paralyzed. I'm glad. Mark Carr there, and he knows about these cases very well. So they're pretty rough cases. So we're glad you're here. Bronwyn, you knew Cliff at the general conference.
Yes, well, I first met Cliff in the early 1990s. What year was it, Cliff, when you joined?
Well, I became Liberty editor, I think 93.
Okay.
92, 93.
Yeah, I started 92, and I knew I was there just before. We worked in the same department. Which
I remember very well.
Public Affairs and Religious Liberty.
Yeah.
I was in Public Affairs and Cliff was in Religious Liberty. And I always enjoyed being around him because he was fun. What you see is what you get.
Oh, well, not everybody likes what they see.
Thank you.
Sometimes that's the problem. Yeah. But anyway, that's very kind of you. But well, I've been at the GC since '84. And for 7 years, I edited a Jewish magazine, New Israelite, Shabbat Shalom. Then I was Liberty editor for about 7 years. And then I became Sabbath School editor in 1999. And that's what I've been doing since. So I'm assuming I get reappointed the annual council, I might be doing it for a few more years. So anyway.
Well, what does that mean? First of all, parenthetically, do you have a guest with you, Cliff?
Do I have a what?
A guest with you?
A guest? Oh, I don't see him on here. Yeah, I've looked. I don't see him on here. He was those of you know my story. I was living in Israel when I had some experiences. I became a believer, and this guy had baptized me in the Jordan River in 1979. But I don't see him on here. He lives in Jerusalem, so I guess he didn't make it. So
okay, very good.
Anyway. Sure.
Okay, what do you do at the general conference as editor of the quarterlies?
Well, basically, I edit the quarterly. I mean, we have a committee and they get topics, and then I'm supposed to find the author, fit the topic. We give them a couple of years to write it, and then go everything, a committee here and a committee there, and then I edit it. And then when I'm done editing it, we send it out to the world divisions, the 13 divisions, and then it's pretty much out of my hands then. The divisions are responsible for translating, printing, distributing it, and so forth. But I pretty much, my grubby fingerprints are on one end of the quarterly or the other. Really, it depends on how well they're done. If I get a well done quarterly, I'll do as little as I possibly can. I really try to edit as light as I can. And if I need to do more, I'll do more. But yeah, I love it. I mean, it's a fairly thankless job. And whoever takes my place, I got to tell them, if you're somebody, you got to be patted on the back for what you do. You don't want the Sabbath School quarterly job because, but I consider it a privilege, and I love writing, I love editing, and so I love doing it. And I've been doing it now for over 20 some years, and I think I still enjoy it as much as when I began.
Now, some people who've written for you say that the final product doesn't look what they submitted. And how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that might happen on occasion, but I think for the most part, we do try to leave it in. And I had a disaster a couple of years ago where I made some mistakes on my end, but I do try to leave as much of the original author in as I can. But sometimes too, the Sabbath School Quarterly, it's not supposed to be controversial. It's supposed to be, what we believe. And sometimes I tell authors, look, this isn't a place for personal agendas. You've got other places to do it. And so sometimes I have to, but, editing is always a subjective thing. But yeah, though I do find, though, that most people who write for me are willing to do it again. They can't be that upset because they come back and they want to do it again. Through the grace of God, I do what I believe is best for the world church with the Sabbath School Quarterly. Because you got to remember, I've got I just don't have Loma Linda. Okay. Right. I don't have, I've got the whole world, and it's not always easy to, because obviously it doesn't work for some people. When was the last time you guys studied the Sabbath School Quarterly? Back in the 50s.
You've been really gracious about that. And I've winced because I think we're missing a lot of this quarter by not looking at Hebrews, and we're going to have to circle back and do that because that's one of the greatest pieces of literature ever. Yeah. And so we're going to have to do better than we have. Anything else about your background before we turn to your book?
Well, I think maybe you mentioned, I thought I'd spend a few minutes giving a bit of background to help you understand a bit where I'm coming from. As my good friend, a deceased Irv Taylor, always said, psychology determines theology. And, I don't agree. I think psychology might influence it. But anyway, just very quickly, I hear some echo. Okay, anyway, I grew up in a very secular Jewish home. I think the best way to describe the way was basically the way we did the holidays. They tried to kill us. They failed. Let's eat. Okay, that was the depth of my religious upbringing. And I was very secular, very postmodern. You have your truth and you have yours. And it was kind of ironic, but I was about 20 years old. I was in a pizza parlor. And I was reading a book about Benedictus Spinoza. And if there's anybody who I disagreed with everything the man had to say, everything from start to finish, I don't think there's a philosopher who I just disagreed with more. But something in the book made me realize that truth had to exist. There's a reality, there's something here, something had to explain it. And whatever that was the truth. And I felt this burning. I can still remember just walking through a street thinking, if it were humanly possible to know what this truth was, because I realized that even though it had to exist, the fact that I or anyone could know it is a totally separate thing. Okay. And so I had no idea if I could know it, or if I learned it, how would I even know? But anyway, the bottom line, after some pretty heavy experiences, I was born again. I had a born again experience, and I became a Seventh-day Adventist. And you have no idea, unless you've been through it, what it's like. I mean, you wake up one day and you've got one worldview. And by the time you go to bed and you wake up the next day, I had a whole new worldview at the most fundamental level. Things that I mean, we're down to the level of axioms practically. It suddenly hit me that almost everything I had believed up until my 23rd birthday was wrong. And that was quite a shift for me, okay, just overnight. But anyway, I'm coming in. Took me about 6 months from the time I was born again and met the Adventists to become an Adventist. You folks born and raised in the church, you have no idea how bizarre all this stuff can appear, okay? But anyway, I became an Adventist, but very early on, I was confronted with the question of evolution, because I had been raised on evolution. I remember in the 5th grade, those first, I think these were the textbooks that first came out and started the creationist movement. The 5th grade, having this textbook, and it showed a picture of a shallow pool, and then an amoeba, and then a jellyfish, and a fish, and an amphibian, and on, and they drew a line through it, and I never questioned it. In 9th grade biology, I thought I was hot stuff because I knew what ontogeny, which recapitulates phylogeny, was. They were teaching that nonsense in the late 1960s, okay? So I had this, I never questioned evolution. It was never taught to me in a way that you would ever question it. It just never presented itself that it might be wrong. But it was very weird that that was the one thing I could not reconcile. I could not, and I had met these Adventists and they said, no, it's don't worry. And anyway, but I did worry about it. So I remember they gave me a book. I don't even think I was an Adventist then. This was in the first month after I was born again. I was still trying to get used to the idea that I was a sinner. That was kind of a hard thing. But they gave me some book, and I don't even remember what book it was. And this is the point I'm going to get to, and then we'll go from there, because I think this is very foundational. I mean, no one's going to deny the fossils are in the ground. No one's going to deny that. But with that, it was the first time in 23 years that I had ever been presented with the realization that, hey, there might be other ways to interpret them being there. See, up until that point, I never questioned it. And I wasn't so much angry that I was taught evolution, but looking back, I think I was angry that I was taught it in such a dogmatic way. That was it. Nobody doubted it. And if you doubted it in any way, and anyway, that was sort of, this is when I see somebody put a note here. Does the fact that Clifford is a convert? Well, I don't, make a difference. Well, I mean, I'd like to think I'm seeking truth for truth's sake, and we all come at it with our own perspectives. But anyway, that was the bottom line. And everything I've ever read and studied since then has made me more convinced that the only thing more ludicrous, and I don't want to offend anybody, I'm just going to be blunt. The only thing more ludicrous than atheistic evolutionism is theistic evolution, and particularly when the theos is the God of the Bible. I mean, that video that you sent out, that you asked us to look at, I watched it from beginning to end, and obviously I'm not a fan of Richard Dawkins, but I think that these atheists, I think they're more logical and rational in their thinking than theistic evolution. But anyway, enough. I'll let you pick it up from there, but that's the background I bring into it. Was raised with it, never questioned it. And now it really astonishes me. Every morning when I sit down and eat breakfast, and my wife has to listen to me almost every morning, it's like, will you just eat? I look at the fruit. I look at this stuff. And I defy anyone to give me a logical, rational, even semi-sensible scenario where the pomegranate evolved, the banana evolved. And anyway, all right, well, enough. That's sort of, we maybe could get into this. Okay, I say I keep
I'd like to pause there just a little bit, because you said a person like Richard Dawkins is, did you say more honest?
Well, not more logical.
More logical. That's what
yeah. I would say the logic. I would. Yeah. It was funny. I was fascinated with Peter Singer. And I remember a friend of mine said, well, Cliff, you certainly take your beliefs to the logical conclusion. I mean, I felt like Peter Singer was logical. To this day, he backed off. If the baby's born after 3 months, you want to get rid of it, because a chicken's got more human attributes. So I forgot how he phrased it. So there was a logic there, but no, I am not here impinging upon anybody's honesty. You have to really, I think you have to be brainwashed to believe in evolution, and even be more brainwashed to think you can harmonize it with the Bible. But I don't doubt everybody's belief, their sincerity and their honesty with it. But we all know, I'm just as sincere and as honest. So some of us are wrong. Okay. So anyway, I want to make that clear. And I haven't always in my writings maybe been as gracious as I should have been with that. But I don't want to impinge anybody's motives in Adventism. The Adventist Church has been wonderful to me, and the Adventist people have been wonderful to me. And I'm forever grateful to the church and to the people in the church, because I wouldn't to learn these truths from anybody else other than the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But anyway.
Okay. Well, I think that's a very important difference between your view of the logic of the situation and your view of their motivations. That's a very, very important. Yeah. And we need to nail that down, and we have nailed it down. Is it okay to turn to the book?
Amen. Let her rip.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by what you're going to say. Well, okay. You know what got me going? I have since 1994, I used to, when I was before I telecommuted here, I had like a 50-minute drive to the GC every morning. And I became an aficionado of the teaching company. If you're familiar, I started with cassettes and CDs, and I probably got 800 lectures on my iPhone from them. And there was a series on there called Science War by a guy named Stephen, I think, Goldberg. And it was just a philosophy of science. And I have listened to that thing over and over. I mean, he's an atheist. I don't think he's an atheist. I think he had a kippah. Someone said they saw the lectures on film and he had the kippah on. So that whether that necessarily means he believes in God, I don't know. But whatever, he was an evolutionist and so forth. But it fascinated me, and it got me reading more. I spent for a couple of years, all I did was read philosophy of science. I was fascinated by it. And then one day I'm listening to these lectures, and I was so excited by what I listened to, by what it was, the philosophy of science. I'm the kind of person, when something gets me excited, my first thing is I want to share it. I want to share it. And I know he'd be horrified. I was going to dedicate the book to him, and I think he would have been horrified. And when I wrote it, I sent him the book. I sent him a nice letter. I said, look, I know you're good. You taught us about assumptions. I'm working from different assumptions, but I'd like to think I was a good student, whatever. And I sent him the book. Of course, he never responded. He probably thought, I mean, what? Somebody sent me a book on flat Earth. I'm going to respond. And, for these people, creationism, you're a flat earther. Well, but anyway, the bottom line was I was excited about what I learned because, and here's the ironic thing. I spent 3 years reading philosophy of science before I even started the book. And 95% of the books that I read were written by atheists and or evolutionists. Okay, I found 1 or 2 books written by Christians, whatever, but it just broke me free from the myth of scientism. I've been accused of being a science denier, and I think we all are to some degree, but I grew up, the moment someone said it was science, you had to kowtow and bow down, and woe be to you, you dare challenge science. And that, I think, is the great myth of our time. And those tapes, he helped me to understand. I guess the bottom line was one of the points, and even though I knew this before, he explained it so clearly. The fact that a theory works, and the fact that you can make accurate predictions, and the fact that you can even build technology from it, is a totally separate issue from whether the theory behind it is true or not. And that was like, wow, even though I kind of knew that, the way he explained it. And so, but so much today, well, the science works. I mean, the technology is unbelievable what we get out of it. But anyway, the bottom line was I wanted to free people. How well it worked. Anybody read it? I have the vaguest idea if anybody reads it.
Okay, I'd like to pause here again,
Sure.
if you don't mind. And that is to underline the fact that this is a book in the philosophy of science.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
It really isn't a book about creation and evolution in the first instance. I view that as a case study that you're working with.
Exactly.
But you could have used some other case study, or in my view, you could have taken out of that book every reference to creation and evolution. I would not recommend doing that, but one could do that, and the book would be well worth reading because it's a book on the philosophy of science. Now, I can imagine people saying, how come there's so much philosophy in this book? Well, to me, that's like asking, why is there so much chemistry and biochemistry, right? This is a philosophy issue. It's not a biological issue. It's not a geological issue. It's not an anthropological issue. It's a philosophical issue. And I really think we really need to nail that down at the outset.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's true.
Okay, have I lost touch with you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Now let's move to the book. Let's look at some, yeah, okay. Okay, we're getting an echo.
I'm fine.
Okay. I'm going to have to back out and come again, but here's Cliff, could you jot these down?
Me jot these down? Yeah.
Yes. Number 1, yes, please. Here are 5 distinctions.
Oh, you sent that to me already, I think, didn't you? All right, go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I did, but I'd like you to comment on them because I'm going to have to back out and come back in.
Okay.
Science versus scientism.
Okay. Okay.
Second one is true versus good.
Yeah, good, good. You picked up the essence of the book.
Number 3. Okay, number 3, description versus explanation.
Okay, very good. You got the essence here.
Okay, number 4, verification. Verification versus
Yeah. Falsification.
falsification.
Right.
Okay, and the fifth one is determining and
Yeah.
under determining.
Yeah, under determination. Sure. Okay. Now, are you going to get off? So should I just keep talking about this?
Just take those down one at a time.
Yeah. So should I start?
Okay, I'm going to leave and come back.
All right.
Cliff?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
go
Move
ahead and,
forward.
go ahead and start.
Yeah, Cliff,
Yes.
would you turn your volume down a tiny bit because it's higher compared to everybody else?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, that's
Is this
good.
better?
Thank you.
Yeah, let me know and I'll adjust it to whatever you want. Yeah.
That's better. Thank you.
Okay. So should I go ahead?
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead, Cliff.
Well, the first thing is science versus scientism. And I think that's an important distinction to make because I don't know, how could anybody be anti-science? I mean, come on, look at what, in many ways, what science has done. But that is a difference between that and this idea of scientism. And in the beginning of the book, I got a number of different quotes from people dealing with scientism. But, it is frequently claimed that natural sciences does or soon will continue the entire domain of truth. It was funny, I was just reading a book about Wittgenstein, and he railed against this idea of that science is the only way to know truth. And it's just the idea that, well, as I said, when I grew up, and I would do the same thing too. The moment you told it was science, then you just were assumed that you needed to accept it, that somehow it reached some epistemological status that made it better, more certain than everything else. And I think in certain areas that might be true. But in everything, and the fact that everything in the world could be explained ultimately by science, see, it's ironic because to make that claim, and I fall into this trap all the time, when I say, well, to make that claim, that's a philosophical claim, not a scientific claim, which is kind of ironic because by saying it's only philosophy, it's not science, then suddenly it becomes ideally a little less certain in people's minds. But anyway, the bottom line is I really, and again, if it came across wrong in the book, would be just my weakness as a writer. I was against scientism, not science itself. So anyway, and I imagine most of you here, if you're Seventh-day Adventists, you would probably agree with that. If you're basic Adventism or Christianity, you probably wouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
And I think the thesis of the book is that scientism is wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the issue here. Okay,
Yeah.
Second one was the true versus the good.
Yeah, this was fascinating. I think I had a whole chapter in here. I haven't looked at this in a while. But I think it was Larry Loudon a philosopher of science, and I think he was the one that could say a theory was good, but not true. And it was like, whoa, that blew my mind. And yet it comes back to, as I said, I talked about this before, you can have a theory that works, that allows you to make predictions, and yet, and enables you to do good things, quote unquote. But in the end, the theory might be wrong. I mean, just one example that I've used before. I mean, for 1,000 years, if you wanted to sail your boat, say from Genoa to Lisbon, you could do it using a geocentric cosmos, with the idea of the Earth sitting immobile at the center of the universe, and all the planets orbiting it in perfect circles at constant speeds. I mean, you were able to sail your boat from one to the other, or if you wanted to predict the motions of Venus, you could do it. So in a sense, the theory was good. It enabled you to do good things, but it wasn't true. And so that, and again, as I said, I think that's part of the myth of science. The technology works so well that you tend to equate that with the truth of the theory. And this guy, Goldberg, in there had a whole section. He talked about by the end of the 19th century, where they had all these great technological advances. By the early 20th century, almost, they would go to these industrialists. Well, we hate to tell you, but the theory behind your widget that you're mass producing and selling for 5 times what you cost you to make it, the theory's wrong. Well, they doesn't care. Does it do what it wanted them to do? So anyway, that's somewhat the idea. And that comes to a basic weakness in the whole, in epistemology in general. Okay,
next one.
Description, yeah. Well, this is,
explanation.
Yeah, all right. Well, let me just give you a quick, short example of that. Everybody knows E equals MC squared. Okay, everybody knows it. What does it explain? It explains nothing. It just describes, it says energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. It doesn't explain why. It doesn't, you don't have any idea why it does it. All we know is that this is the formula that does it. It describes what happens. And there is a whole branch in the philosophy of science which rejects the idea of science as any kind of search for truth. Science is merely about making descriptions, about making models. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying there are some people who would argue that the moment you try to get into explanations, you're getting into metaphysics and so on and so forth. So that's anyway, that's
okay. Okay. The next one is determining versus under determining.
Oh no, we missed verification versus falsification.
Yes, thank you.
Well, that just comes back. That comes back to Karl Popper, who was in many ways, in some ways, one of the most influential philosophers of science in the 20th century. And he was concerned with how do you differentiate science from pseudoscience? Okay, he wasn't saying whether the science was right. I mean, he argued that things like, they claim that Marxism was scientific. I forgot Freud's stuff was scientific and so forth. He wasn't just saying they were right or wrong. He was just questioning whether they were scientific or not. And he came up with his theory of falsification, which is if in principle your theory could be falsified, then in principle this was science. Now, there, from like all of these, there are people who rejected it and they say, and so forth. But anyway, that's all that was. That was just an attempt to help differentiate between science and pseudoscience.
Okay, we're going to come back to that one. Determining versus underdetermining.
Yeah, well, that comes back again. It touches on this. I mean, for Popper, the fact that your theory could make accurate predictions was totally irrelevant. You could pick any theory. You could come up with 100, 1,000 different theories that could explain the phenomena. And so how do you determine which one is right? And the argument there is simply that in the end, you ultimately can't know for sure, no matter what theory you have, no matter how accurate it is, it's undetermined because somebody else could come along 5 years later with another theory and give what would seem like a better, see, that's the whole question of what makes a theory work, better explanation. And I think it's just a fundamental weakness. That's why people say science isn't about explanations, it's about descriptions, because no matter what explanation you give, it's very possible that somebody could come along later with another explanation that's supersedes.
Accurate.
Okay, what I want to do now is quickly summarize where we've been so far. Monty, I think we've got you on, we need to mute Monty, I think. Okay, I'd like to summarize where we've gone so far, then take a different direction, okay?
Sure.
I think we have established that your book is a book in the realm of the philosophy of science.
Yeah.
Okay. And that you are not questioning the motives of anybody, but you have more or less strong positions about the logical position of
Sure.
different views. Okay,
Sure.
And then these 5 distinctions, which we've just mentioned, if someone's writing them down, this is important. These 5 distinctions are the core of your philosophical view of science. 1, science versus scientism. 2, true versus good. 3, description versus explanation. 4, verification versus falsification. And 5, determining and underdetermining. Now, I'd like to, you mentioned a little bit about Karl Popper. Do you want to say something about Thomas Kuhn?
Woo! Oh, man. Well, I don't know how I'm going to take my coat off. I get all worked up. I mean, I don't know how you could even, once Kuhn wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, pretty much the philosophy of science since then has been, some would argue, in a response to Kuhn, some against him, some for him, some taking him much further than he would have gone. And I think with Kuhn, what you have is one of these things where, for better or for worse, I always look, I'm a metaphysical kind of guy. I like big picture things. And in almost in every realm, philosophy, theology, there are aspects of truth that each group has. There are elements of truth in almost every group you could find. I think Marx had some truth. He took it too far. I think Darwin had some truth. He took it too far. And Kuhn's whole thing, I mean, I imagine most of you are aware of Kuhn. He talked about the paradigm, and it wasn't new. I didn't quote in there, what was his name? Michael Polanyi, the chemist, I think he was Czech. He was saying basically the same thing as Kuhn is. Science is done through a filter, through a paradigm. And everything is interpreted through the paradigm. And then and I don't know how anybody could disagree with that. Where Kuhn starts getting controversial is he says eventually there are anomalies that come and the entire paradigm is thrown out and you get a whole new paradigm with a whole new set of first principles, a whole new way of looking at the world, and so on and so forth. And he's kind of arguing against this idea of this straight line logical progression of science. And I do think, in fact, if we have time, I gave one example in there of what I thought was a classic example of that. But yeah, anyway, Kuhn, I mean, I can give you that example unless you want to move on, because if you don't stop me, I'll just keep going.
Well, I do think you have a very important point to make here, and that is the view that science is wholly inductive. That is, it moves from the specific and concrete up to the general and abstract, is, according to Kuhn, not accurate. If one looks at the history of science, we will see that there are whole paradigms that govern from the top down what one sees. And you use the example of a supernova that was seen in parts of the world, but not seen in other parts of the world, because the paradigm allowed them to see it or not see it. Say more about that, please.
Yeah, well, if I remember, the people years ago were working under the Aristotelian. To me, Charles Darwin is the Aristotle of the 19th, 20th century, 21st. I mean, it's astonishing to me. Though the difference I'd say is, if Aristotle could be right, it wouldn't affect Christianity. My view, if Darwin is right, I'd say we're all going to hell. No, we're not going to hell, because there is no hell, at least no hell in the Bible. That's how strong I feel about it. But they have the supernova. But Western astronomers who have the Aristotelian paradigm that the universe is flawless, it's perfect, it's unchangeable, they didn't see it. Whereas the Chinese, who weren't in that paradigm, they were able to see it. So, I mean, that was a powerful example. Let me give you another quick one that I think in one of the courses, and this was fascinating to me, in the teaching company, was The Origins of Life by a guy named Robert Hazen. And I think he taught at George Mason University. And he starts out, and I was amazed at how honest he was. He starts out by saying, I am working on the assumption that, 4 billion years ago, through the laws of physics and chemistry that apply today, through air, water, and rock, all life formed. That's where life started, and then formed from there. I mean, come on, that's a pretty, I almost think that's a philosophical assumption. But anyway, that was his assumption right up front. And then the whole course he went through Miller-Urey, and then why that didn't work. There was the idea that life began in thermal vents, and then when that didn't work, life began in shale. That didn't work, life began in clay. That didn't work, life came from meteorites, and so on. And he ends it by saying, well, we really don't know. And to me, it got kind of heavy science stuff that was beyond me. But what was fascinating to me was, I don't think it ever entered the man's mind that maybe none of these different tracks worked, because his paradigm was wrong. His initial thing that life began 4 billion years ago through the same laws of chemistry and physics that exist today, I don't think it ever entered his mind. And to me, that was a fascinating example of a paradigm, and how a paradigm can lock you into something. And it'd be great if the paradigm was true, okay? But see, that's how you ultimately know, But anyway, that's the gist of Kuhn. And it's been, as I said, I don't know how anybody could question the idea of working in a paradigm. It's his revolutions and how the paradigms change that people have rejected. But anyway,
I think that's so important, because in the philosophy of science, Kuhn's impact is
Oh, yeah.
unbelievably powerful. Okay, now you mentioned Aristotle. My view is that probably he has the most prominent place in your book. I think if I counted the references to different people, Aristotle would be mentioned more often than anybody else.
Really?
I think so.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Okay, so I want, if you don't mind, I'm sounding too bossy here, but I would invite you to talk about Aristotle and why he is so central to the argument you're developing.
Well, again, I mean, I'm hardly an Aristotle scholar. I find him, I much prefer reading Plato. Plato is much more, to try to read Aristotle. But I think that Aristotle had the prominence because for how many, up until the beginning of the scientific revolution, he was, as I say, the Darwin of all those centuries. Everything. There was a great quote from Francis Bacon, and I loved it. He first started to try to break away from the Aristotelian dominance. And I love this quote. He says, "I refuse to be condemned by a tribunal that is itself on trial," or something like that. Because he said, they were forced to read. When they went to Oxford, they had to sign a pledge that they will accept only things that harmonize with the philosopher. Okay, and so his dominance over science, and again, I think that was, I used that particularly. I had the chapter on the Galileo trial, and I argued, and I gave a talk at the the Society of Adventist Philosophers. I can't believe they actually let me do it, on how I believe that the true heirs of the inquisitors who gave Galileo such a hard time are the theistic evolutionists today, who, and you know as well as I do, that if some poor schnook in the regular science community actually dared to intimate that there might be design, say in blood clotting or something, they'll do to him what they wanted to do to Galileo. But anyway, they persecuted Galileo because they were interpreting the Bible through the lens of Aristotle. Earth sitting immobile at the center of the universe, and this crackpot comes along and says, no, the Earth is circling around the sun. They were viewing it through him. And I think almost every single point they made was built on an Aristotelian interpretation of the Bible. And I think today, I'm sorry, and I mean no disrespect, I have read, and I still always look for, books written by Christians who try to harmonize evolution with any fair reading of the text. And in principle, I say to some of my theistic evolutionist friends, and I have a lot of theistic evolutionist friends, we get along very well. I said, even if I were to accept your premise that we shouldn't read Genesis, quote, literally however you want, how do you find any way, in any reasonable way, I mean, this is the thing that astonishes me, in any reasonable way to read billions of years of unguided, in the Genesis account, I mean, in almost every particular, as well as even the broad things, they're completely at odds. I mean, God couldn't have done a better job in explaining creation. And when it turns out they were wrong all through the Old Testament period, all through the New Testament period, all through the medieval period, all through the Reformation, all through the early scientific revolution. And we have to wait for Charles Darwin to come along and straighten us all out. I'm sorry. But anyway, that's I'm going
Okay.
with. But the bottom line is,
Okay, now I want to end up, we've just about finished our first hour, then other people will take over.
sure, good.
But I do want to say that we didn't cover anywhere near all that we could have covered,
Sure.
but I think we have established that this is a book in the philosophy of science and whatever follows from that. And I hope we have a discussion at that level, not a discussion about how old the earth is,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you know, that all of those issues with which we are well acquainted. We can spend the next hour just trotting around all those old issues if we want, or we can take this seriously as, I think, the most fascinating exploration by an Adventist into the philosophy of science. Okay, having said that, one of the people you turn to, not as often as Aristotle, but quite, I think maybe 2 or 3 times, is Alfred North Whitehead. And I'd like you to end up by saying why, of all the people on Earth, you admire him. After all, he himself was an evolutionist. Why do you quote him so favorably?
Well, again, Whitehead's philosophy is not easy. I think even professional philosophers have struggled with Whitehead to know exactly. I think the main thing, and I wish I could find that, he had this quote, and that was the main reason. He had this one quote, and I'm going to give it off the top of my head, but I loved it. He said, I studied math and science in Oxford, and I studied with some of the best mathematicians or whatever. And he said, I did very well. I did very well in those classes. And then he said, the years have gone by. And then he said, I have now come to see every one of these foundational assumptions. And he was talking about, I think, math in particular. I've come to see every one of them overturned. And yet now we claim to have certainty. And I think that was the main point that I wanted to get from him on that. And again, it's like some of the, I mentioned in the book, if you would have gone 120, 125 years ago, there was probably nothing in science more certain than the existence of the luminiferous ether or the ether. I mean, I've found all these quotes where it was as staunch as a heliocentric universe or solar system. And today, the idea of the ether, it sounds like it comes from mythology. And so I think there's this point here that, well, science, the moment you say it's science, then people just assume it's got to be true, at least the public. I think honest scientists know better than that. They know better than that, but the way it's presented. But anyway, that was the main thing for me with Alfred North Whitehead. That was my only real point. I can't really penetrate his philosophy.
I think it's a marvelous point. I have spent a lot of my life working with his work.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, okay.
The fact that you looked upon him as an exemplar warmed my heart. That's a...
Oh, okay. Did you ever figure out what he was saying?
On some things.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
But the problem is he didn't say everything the same way at the same time.
Yeah. Well, he was into process theology, wasn't he? He was the founder of it, wasn't he?
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, but there's a story of him as he was aging when there was a social gathering at his home, and he was sort of retired off by himself in another room, but he came out into the place where all the other people were. And he stood in the middle of the room and he said, "The universe is vast. The universe is vast. The universe is vast." Then he turned around and went back to his bedroom. So that's okay. Let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay,
And
great.
Forrest takes over after the 10-minute break. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, Cliff.
Yeah, enjoyed it so far. Let me go read some of the messages here.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll put you in the queue. We are going to limit the question to 2 minutes. And no second question until everyone else has had a chance to speak. So raise your hand if you want to be put in the queue, and I'll write you down. So we'll see you, what time, David?
11:42.
11:42 here on the West Coast.
Thank you, Forrest.
Okay. Yeah, that was fun, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was, so your wife just said you did your dissertation on him.
I did.
I guess it was more from his theology, huh?
No, the title of it was The Bioethical Availability of Whitehead's Philosophy.
Wow. Give me the essence. What was he? How would you, if you're gonna, if you can't, I mean.
I don't know, David, do you want to take that now or you want to take your break?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You wanted to take a break. I'm sorry.
Let's take a break. Some of the
Yeah,
best
I'm sorry.
discussion. Yeah, some of
I'm
the
sorry.
discussion. I would like a chance somewhere down the line for us toward the end. I've had a lot of chance to talk. Let's
Okay,
let other
well,
people talk. But when if there's a lull, I'd like to respond to Cliff's question. Summarize in one sentence what Alfred North Whitehead had in mind. I can do it.
okay, so people at our age need to take a break right now. Cliff,
Yeah,
so-
I know the feeling.
So,
I
okay.
know the feeling.
At 40, and what, that would be 18 minutes to the hour. Okay. I'm seeing some hands come up, or one, and so raise your hand.
Forrest, may I make another request? And that is that we invite Cliff. Oh, I can see them. I'll make a request now during the break. Cliff, if you could abbreviate your answers to about the tithe of their current length. That way we'll get more people involved, okay?
About the what of their current length?
No, about 2 minutes, about 2 minutes.
10%.
Okay. So what should I do for 10 minutes?
No.
Oh.
Make your responses shorter.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Look, do that because I'll keep going and going and going. So just you, Forrest, just give me a like that and I'll stop.
Well, I don't
Otherwise-
even have to do that, Cliff. I can mute you at any time.
Yeah, okay, but then let me know. Yeah, if I go too far, because I will. I just
Okay,
want
all right.
I know
Cliff,
that, and I'm trying to
No
change.
reproaches,
All right.
reproaches at all. But let's get as many people in as we can.
Yeah.
Okay,
At
let's take a
66,
break.
I don't change very easily. Just ask my wife. So.
Okay, I'm muting you now, Cliff. Yeah. I'll take a cup of coffee. What? Did you make it a cup? No. Just set that. Okay.
What was he saying about science?
He's talking about his shortcomings. Most scientists know the shortcomings in science. There's another thing called scientism, which is kind of a belief, an ism that feels they have all the answers. And I'm just going to say, and that's what Malin's criticism of him was. He says he doesn't understand science. He's a philosophical perspectives.
Forrest, you are not muted. We
Oh,
can
I'm
hear
not?
you. In case you want to keep that private. Sorry. This was Dana.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, it's 11:42. We're going to be starting in just a minute or two. Robert Ford, are you in town today? I don't know. Okay. And Dana, I think it was you to thank me for muting my my computer. It's just, this is the same thing that we advise speakers who have lapel mics that if they go to the restroom, make sure they turn them off. So anyway, I'm kind of waiting for David to come back, and we'll go from there.
Monty, Forrest.
Yeah.
This is Bob. I'm here. I'm actually pulled over at the side of the road, not far from you folks. I'm near Beaumont, but we're driving toward Palm Springs.
Oh, okay. Well, you're beyond us then. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, it's enjoyable listening to it, and we've been camping, so I'm not going to show my face today.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
You can't be worse than Cliff was when he went to David's office, I'm sure. So,
Yeah, right. Yeah. So,
okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Okay. David, are you back yet?
No, Forrest, he needs another minute.
Okay, I'll give him another minute.
Okay, thanks.
This is Ruth.
Yeah, Ruth, I got your hand up here. Yeah.
I don't want to talk. I just want to say, other than to say that he's still too loud.
He's still too loud?
For me. And I haven't
Okay.
been able to put it far enough away from me to.
Can you turn your speaker down, Ruth?
I don't know how to do it anymore.
Okay. All right. And Karsten Thompson, all the way from Denmark. I talked to Shirley. What's Shirley's last name? She knows you from Denmark. Nielsen, Shirley Nielsen. You know her, Karsten?
No, I don't.
Well, she knows you. Maybe.
Well, knowing and knowing of is two different things.
Anyway, I spoke to her the other day. Anyway, but her father's Danish and her mother's English. Anyway, I can't remember.
Forrest, is this a good time to start?
Oh, yeah, let's go. I've got a couple hands up. Plus, I've got one question from afar. And so we can start now.
Go for it.
Okay. Thank you again, Cliff, for being here. And now I've just lost you. I know you're on there somewhere. Cliff, where are you? Okay.
Okay, you got me? Yeah.
I'm sure you're there you are. I see you now. Okay. All right. The first question I would like to ask, it's from Jan Long. And it's from.
Hello, Jan.
Anyway, Jan asked his question, and I'm going to read the question. Cliff is troubled by the fact that science is built to some extent on assumptions, and he therefore diminishes the authority of sciences for that reason. But it's hard to overlook the fact that the sacred genre is built on assumptions from top to bottom, while at least science is connected to the real world through the senses. So why would we conclude that sacred conclusions should trump scientific conclusions?
Well, yeah, we're all built on again, if I start going too far, just
I'm going
cut
to
me,
time
because
you.
I will do it. I know I will do it. I'm not changing at 66. But well, he's right. It is on assumptions. And ultimately faith. You know what, again, you know what the bottom line is? Let me be blunt. And I have a whole chapter in the book on this. I think I call it the inexorable intrusion of assumption. So I'll keep it short and to the point. The bottom line is we all have assumptions. We all need faith. And it's ultimately what you put your faith in. You put your faith in assumptions that lead to what certainly seem to me to be things that directly, blatantly contradict even any fair, reasonable reading of the scripture. And so that's why I have a problem with those assumptions. So yes, I agree, Jan, we all work with assumptions, but I've got very, very good reasons, logical, rational reasons for my belief in the Bible, my belief in Christianity, my belief in creation. It was weird. I said to my wife the other day, and then I'll stop, and I got to be very careful how I say this. I am so logically, rationally, intellectually convinced of Adventism. It's almost like I don't need faith. And I realize I ultimately I do. My good friend Irv Taylor once asked me, he said, Cliff, do you ever doubt? And I said, well, not so much anymore, but when I do, I realize my doubts are so irrational. And he goes, irrational? And I said, yes, the experiences I've had and the things I believe, the most irrational thing I could do is doubt. And the bottom line, yes, we all have assumptions. What assumptions do you accept? And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to go now to Karsten Thompson from Denmark. Karsten?
Hey, son.
Where?
No, I just said hello to him. And
oh, okay. Karsten, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how many engineers and scientists are on the forum tonight.
McKinley's here.
McKinley, okay, great. It's a fascinating discussion because we're discussing what is truth spiritually, what's truth from a physics engineering standpoint. And there are many parallels, and I agree with a lot of things that Clifford says. The thing that I have a big problem with working in that field, as I've done all my life, it's a lot more.
What field?
Physics, mathematics,
cool.
Engineering, and so
Physics. On. That's the real science. Everything else is stamp collecting.
Yeah. No.
I'm just kidding you.
It's a lot more nuanced. The basis of what I consider great scientists and engineers is a humility with which they attack the subject that they're dealing with. They recognize that what they see and observe and measure is a limited part of the so-called reality. They recognize that when they discover a so-called law of nature, that it only has limited applications, be it Einstein's E equals mc squared or Newton's laws of physics and so on. They are not laws. They are only applicable in a certain range of parameters and so on.
Yeah.
And in many discussions, they become very nuanced because we talk about truth as an absolute. We talk about spiritual truth as an absolute. And I strongly disagree with both of those things. I believe that curiosity, doubt, is a basic attribute for exploring both the spiritual world and the physical world. And if we go to the point of saying that we have the truth, we're stuck because the truth is a path. It's a never-ending path. Jesus said, I am the truth. That is, he is a way, a journey along the truth. And that truth evolves. It evolves from an engineering and a physics and mathematics standpoint. It evolves spiritually. It may have been able to describe something that was useful at a point in time, like you could navigate, as you mentioned, in the Mediterranean using a wrong view of the world, but it worked. 1844 was invented by disappointed Adventists. It worked. It got them out of the disappointment.
Okay.
Maybe it isn't the truth today. And I'd just like to see a more nuanced and a more humble approach to truth, because we are small and God is great.
Okay, thank you, Carson. Cliff? You're muted, Cliff. There you go.
I certainly wouldn't disagree that no matter what we know, and even we know well, we're limited in what we know. And I have no question about that. If we're going to spend eternity learning, it's hard to imagine how little we know now. But again, this is, even though David was right, I did write this as a philosophy of science. It was, the background was the creation evolution thing. And as I mentioned earlier, if science is, if as you said, science is so humble, what, when some poor schnook dares imply that there might be design, they're told they're not doing science, they're the equivalent of Holocaust deniers. And I just was reading lately about how they found some apparently soft tissue where there should be soft tissue. And I think one guy recently got fired from some school because he talked about it. So I agree with you. No matter what we know, we're limited in everything we know. Especially, I think, because, I'm fascinated. I have read so many books on quantum physics. And of course, my knowledge is limited because I can't do the math. But if anything should show us how humble we should be, I mean, what nature at the most fundamental level does to defy common sense and reason. But the upshot of it is, though, for us people in the real world, science, it comes across like, this is it, this is the truth, and if you disagree, you're a moron. So, okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
A brief comment to that. I think the people, Cliff, you're describing there are fringe people. They are not representative of a broader scientific community. The broader scientific community has a humility, has a desire to explore, to try new ways, new hypotheses, and so on. But science gets captured by people who make it binary and intolerant. And it becomes
if that's true, then why does anybody even imply that? Imagine to actually think the human brain might have actually been designed, they're drawn and quartered and all but crucified. So anyway.
Okay.
It's again the fringe you're describing.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to now go to Eduardo. Eduardo.
Okay, thank you, Forrest.
Hello, Eduardo.
Cliff. I'm timing you, Eduardo.
I think I know you.
Thank you. Yes, you know me.
Okay, go ahead, Eduardo.
Cliff, I'm reading John 20:29. Jesus talking to Thomas. He said, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are that they have not seen and yet have believed. In the Bible, I noticed that the Lord manifests his power many, many times to show that he exists. And to me, the best way to prove God is through prophecy, especially telling the future. The motive of writing this book is to make people believe, is my question to you.
The motive of which book? My Baptizing the Devil?
Yeah.
I had one motive in this book. For better or for worse, it was simply to try to break people free from, because maybe as brother from Denmark, maybe the scientists are humble, but when you, I mean, how come, if that's true, how come the moment they would never accept anything that even implies design? Those poor, look, I'm not a big fan of intelligent design because I think they're theistic evolutionists, but to even in, all right, but look, the bottom line is I simply wanted to show people that we don't have to bow down and kowtow to every pronouncement that comes out the name of science. That's the bottom line. If I could help people do that, then maybe, the 5 people who read it, it helps one of them, it'll do them some good. I'd be happy. So that was the bottom line.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And I will now go to Simona.
Thank you. The interesting presentation. So, I think there is a certain level of intellectual honesty that's lacking often on both sides. And I completely agree with Carson that, this humility is the prime focus of science. It should be, because the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. One thing that is that I would like to say, that regardless of how people say it and who says it in which way, dogma is essentially anti-scientific, because science is always in search of truth based on the new information. And I think there is a little difference here between, science and religion, because science is forced to change by new information, while religion generally lacks that flexibility. And I think there is a little bit of a problem there that kind of guides some of these discussions. The second thing I want to say, that search for truth should be a focus for both science and religion. However, the focus of science is physical world, and focus of religion is metaphysical. So I think the most honest way to say is that we truly don't know. Be humble about it, admit that we don't know, that we are searching. And what we are doing is that we are, to the best of our abilities and knowledge and facts that we have in our hands and in our understanding of how these facts fit together, that we are trying to explain the world as we see it. And as our facts evolve, our knowledge of facts evolves, and how understanding how these facts fit together, so is our explanation of the world changes. And the last thing I want to say is the Bible is not meant to be a book on science. It's a book about a relationship between God and humans. It's a history of that relationship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just very, okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Right. When I was writing Baptizing the Devil, I thought, I don't want to make a total idiot of myself. So I gave it to a friend of mine who was a scientist as I was writing. And I said, Bobby, anywhere in here, I'm saying something that you think is just outrageous, please, you just point it out. And scattered through the book, he had these big red circles. And what he circled was anywhere where I implied that science was a search for truth. He circled it. He said, any honest scientist will tell you science is not a search for truth. It's a search for models, descriptions, and so on. Now, I know that there's a whole philosophy of science that way, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but I just thought that it was very interesting that they do, that some would even think science is not a search for truth. It's merely descriptions. What can we do? How can we harness this, kind of the Baconian thing and use it to better life? And then just the other thing real quick, you talk about science changing easily, or science changes, religion doesn't. Well, I guess I'm not, anyway, I would say it's a lot of scientists, they don't change that easily. They're there. So anyway, I probably better not say more.
If
But
I
thank
can
you.
just, if I can just clarify, I didn't say that the religion doesn't change. I just said it's much more difficult to change because, you know, it is not rooted in facts that you can, you know, see and prove and measure.
Right.
Well, science, whether it wants or not, has to change once new facts come to light.
Okay. Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Smoke. I'm now going to go to our good friend Moskovic. Go ahead,
Thank you.
2 minutes.
Okay. I have been trained in science. I have always somehow wished that I could go one day to one of our Adventist universities to attend school there, but never had the opportunity. So I've got all my education and training in what would be normally referred to as secular university. And the thing that I find very odd is that in the secular environment where evolutionary thinking is both explicit and implicit throughout,
It's true.
I have never felt so directly challenged because of my faith in God or creation as I have inside of our Adventist church and inside of our Adventist institutions. Why might that be?
That's your question?
Yes.
So wait, I'm a little, you haven't been challenged. Explain your question a little more. Just, maybe I missed something.
Here is the point. I mean, I never hid that I was either Adventist or that I believed in God or creation or anything like this in any of the secular environments. And I never, I mean, on occasion I was involved in various discussions on the subject, but I never found such deep-seated, at times even bitter opposition to creation as I have encountered within the Adventist church.
Well,
and I don't understand where this springs from.
Yeah, I don't understand it either.
This is something that I'm baffled by.
Yeah. I mean, again, and I know I'm going to tick off a lot of people here. I just put it this way. If somehow epistemologically I could be shown that there were only two possible ways for the universe and life to have been created, Richard Dawkins mocking flying spaghetti monster. That's Richard Dawkins mocking of deism, the flying spaghetti monster. And if it was that, or if it was what thousands upon thousands of PhDs, biologists, chemists, physics, geology, genetics, the fed, the wined and dined, the smart, educated people, what all of they say, the world's most sophisticated, it's their view of evolution, atheistic. I'll even throw in theistic because I think that's more ludicrous. If I were, and I say this and I truly mean it, if I were forced to choose between one or the other, I would go with the flying spaghetti monster.
Okay, all right.
I mean, and I mean it. That's how, I mean, again, the fact that I'm firmly don't believe it is totally irrelevant to whether it's true or not. All I know is that once my eyes, the veil was torn. And again, I was raised on evolution, never questioned it. All I know is, as I said, I've written on this.
Okay, Cliff.
Okay, all right, stop right there. Okay, good. You stopped me at a good point. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Before I
Okay.
cut my head
Thank
off.
you. No, that's fine. That's fine. I want to go now to my good friend from Alaska. Hi, Mark. Make your grandfather proud of you today.
Oh, well, that's right. Forrest and I have connections back to Michigan a long, long time ago.
I knew his grandparents real well, long time before
Yeah.
Mark.
The good Dr. Boscovich drew me out. I work now, as many of you know, in a Catholic healthcare system. You asked the question, Dr. Boscovich, how is it that within the Adventist community, you're challenged in ways that the secular community never bothered to challenge you? I have found a similar reaction. My local church has no idea what to do with me because I work for Catholics. It's not that I've been hiding that fact. It's because of that fact that they have no idea what to do with me.
Come on.
So much so that they won't allow me to teach any Sabbath school class, nothing of the sort. On the opposite end, at work, among Catholics with whom I have been absolutely crystal clear with about who I am and where I come from and how I remain involved in the Adventist community, they're purposefully, specifically, deeply open-minded and welcoming. How is it that the Adventist community eats its own out of obsession with whether we're all in the same, narrow lane? I don't know what to make of it, except that it's extraordinarily frustrating. And what I find about what we say about Catholicism on the street, at the level, in a hospital, has nothing to do with the real lived life of Catholicism, at least in the experience of my local context.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how I could, that's a totally separate question. Yeah, that's a totally, I for the life, you know what I think if I would dare to venture, I think I might even written one time something called The Compromising Christian. And I often sometimes think that maybe because Christianity asks us to believe in some, three gods in one, I realize that's not what the Trinity is. The resurrection of Jesus, the resurrection of the dead. It's some pretty, from a secular standpoint, far out stuff. And I almost wonder if in Christianity, there's this desire not to seem dumb, not to seem like a bunch of superstitious people. So there's this desire to try to seem sophisticated, to be, what the world believes and so on. I don't know. I have never, I just think the lure of science, but how Christians and Seventh-day Adventists could buy into evolution just utterly, utterly astonishes me. I just cannot. If I were convinced that evolution were true, just really convinced, I'd be gone. I'd be gone. The Bible would be a joke to me. I couldn't trust anything the Bible said if I thought it were true. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Okay, all right. I'm getting some repeats here now. David, did you want to jump in here now or go through some of these repeats that we have? Well, I'll tell you what, I do. Whoops, hang on.
I'll quickly answer Cliff's questions about Alfred North Whitehead, and it won't take long.
Okay, go.
Okay, the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead is a comprehensive alternative to Rene Descartes' dualism. Period. That's it.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
All right. Okay. You know, I would like to jump in here if I could, Cliff.
Sure. Sure, please.
You know, and I'm not sure what planet you've been on, but you know, you talk about theistic evolutionists, how they can be Christian and believe the Bible. But you know, I think of Francis Collins, who just retired. I think of Kenneth Miller at Brown University. There's the American Institute of Scientists, which is a Christian organization. I mean, do you just throw them off, put them off to the wayside and say they don't know whatever they're, if they don't know what they're doing? I'm just going to say, I don't find your position very humble, kind of dogmatic.
Well, again, I'm not judging any of these people's faith, their sincerity, their salvation. All I know is that I have read, not as much, I'm always looking for it. Okay, they say they believe in the Bible, fine, and they, you know, Collins just, that guy gets under my skin more than most. But anyway, all that aside, and then yet when I read, okay, how do you harmonize? I have yet to read any single one of these people who's written anything to explain how you can harmonize evolution with the Bible. It's embarrassing to me. Take Desmond Ford. Desmond Ford's thing was the Adam and Eve of Genesis 1 through 324 were a completely different Adam and Eve, separated by 100,000 years from the Adam and Eve in the very next verse, Genesis 1:1, and the man knew his wife Eve. There are 100,000. So in other words, instead of an Adam and Eve, there's an Adam and Eve and another Adam and Eve. That's what he tries to do to the Bible in order to fit it. And I read, Polkinghorne, John Polkinghorne, another one. He said, God created this way in order to spare the creatures the presence of raw, naked infinity. Or some, in other words, show me a theistic evolution who can interpret Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 in any reasonable way, in any real way at all. And I'm all ears to listen. So, but see, it means nothing to me, the fact that all these people do. It's the dominant paradigm. It's out there. So you've got all these people who buy into it. Well, fine, but it means nothing to me. Doesn't affect me at all.
Okay, let's go on. Thank you very much. I totally disagree with you, but
yeah, okay,
let's go on. I want to go to some people I haven't gotten to yet. And so if Karsten and Simona, if you'll just stand by, I want to go to McKinley. 2 minutes, McKinley.
Thank you. Okay, quickly. Thank you, Brother Goldstein, for your presentation. A couple of quick observations. I think your views expressed concerning science mostly has to do with the people who comment on cosmology and origin. There are other areas of science that don't necessarily reflect the dogmaticism of cosmologists and people trying to explain origin, that is kind of sort of nuanced. But it is also my observation that many people use the label science, quote unquote, to lend credibility to a view or especially to disparage Christian beliefs. I think that's a misuse of the term. My second observation is that those in the habit of using the label quote unquote science as a validator don't understand the meaning nor the etymology of the word, because science from the Latin is S-C-I-R-E, which is to know and to discover things. And that can apply to a whole range of the knowledge spectrum. Last comment, science cannot be the arbiter of truth because it is so riddled with uncertainty, and anybody who's in the research and development space would understand that statement. I'll stop there.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, it riddled with, but again, and my point is though, if it's so riddled with uncertainty, why, when somebody like myself who, look, science they could put something under a microscope and they could dissect it and they could x-ray it and they can do PET scans, whatever, they could analyze it and this and that, and they disagree over what they see. There's just what it means. And yet we're supposed to bow down and kowtow when science tells us there's no, 400 million years ago, the whale had hind legs and walked on the earth. And then the whale walked back into the water, and we're supposed to, my favorite one are the raft monkeys. You know about the raft monkeys? They claim that there's a contradiction between the ages, I forgot all the details, and when a monkey species broke off, because you got two of the same species, one's in Africa and one's in South America. So because their science can't be wrong, they speculated that some of the monkeys in Africa rafted to South America. And rather than think, maybe there's something wrong with our theory. So the bottom line is, if science is so humble and all that, it certainly doesn't come across when you deal with the question of origins or evolution. They allow nothing, even intelligent design, the implication of design, they cut them off because they use the argument, it's not science. Well, who tells them? Who made them God and could determine what it is? You might say it's bad science. You might say the science is wrong, but they instantly cut it off because they argue it's not science. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Elmer, did you want to say something? You had a couple questions or comments. Did you want to ask those, Elmer?
Yes. Here's my disclosure. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a philosopher. But I have a question. I was watching a debate between Jonathan Sacks and Richard Dawkins regarding origins. And Jonathan Sacks, who was a previous chief rabbi for the United Kingdom, admitted that Adam and Eve was really a parable and Noah was a parable. So Richard Dawkins asked him, on what basis do you make those determinations? And he said, the rabbis in the 10th centuries made a principle that if the Bible narratives were incompatible with the established scientific, that those narratives were not supposed to be interpreted literally. What do you think about that?
Well, let me give you a better example. There's a well-known theologian, very influential, and he said basically the same thing. He said, when Christians make statements that we know, quote, they didn't use the word scientific then, they make Christianity look like fools, and therefore we shouldn't do it. Okay, sounds reasonable. You know who the theologian was? It was St. Augustine. And so if some Christian would have said something like, the earth moves, they would have crucified him. If some Christian said, I don't think the planets move in perfect circles, they move in ellipses, they would have crucified him. So the bottom line is, as everyone here is saying, science changes. Science should be humble. So why should somebody who believes the Bible change because science says something else? And unfortunately, but that seems to be, because again, it comes back to this idea that, well, when science says it, it's some kind of epistemological hierarchy and whatever, and scientific stuff stands at the top. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to come, I'm just checking. By the way, Elmer, you're.
Yes.
That was okay?
Just a follow-up question. We know that the Bible was a product of the Jewish thinking. Are you telling me that the rabbis were wrong?
Yeah, you're gonna let what was it, 10th century science? You're gonna let 10th century science determine, though I imagine some of the stuff in the 10th century is not anywhere near as ludicrous as what science tells us in the 21st century. So, and if time should last 200 years from now, they would look back. You buffoons, let science tell you what you believe, you know. So anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Now I'm going to come back and do some repeats. Unless there's somebody else who wants to raise their hand, and I didn't see some other chat, unless I missed that.
I thought I saw Monty's hand raised.
Oh, Monty, yes,
Forrest.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Monty. Okay, I guess I've lost Monty. Okay, let's go back to Simona. Simona?
You know, sometimes we look at personalities, and the personality of the person speaking sometimes speaks louder than the content of what they're trying to say. I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying that, you know, when it comes to science, sometimes people who speak about science speak in a way that, you know, can come out harsh, and same can be true for our side as well. To Dr. Bošković, you know, the reason why you're encountering this, because we're all human, and nobody is perfect, and people tend to be very married to their opinions, regardless of the community in which they live. And depending on the personality, they may or may not, you know, deal with those who they disagree with in a different way. Just that much.
All right, thank you. Cliff, did you want to say something in response to that?
No, I just say, please don't. I sometimes think that the biggest problem I have with my views is me and the way I express my personality. That I don't let me. My wife could tell you I'm really a lovable fuzzball, but nobody else thinks that. But anyway.
Well, okay. I think in some states a wife can't testify against her husband, so you're safe. You're safe.
Well, after me going through the ceiling yesterday, you wouldn't want her testifying about me. So.
Okay, I want to come back. Monty, are you still here? Okay, I'm going to go back to Karsten.
I am here, but I'm choosing just to hold my thoughts.
Okay, do you want to come on later then?
No.
Okay.
I
Come on, let it rip. Let it rip. Come on.
Tight and close.
Okay. All right, Karsten.
Yeah, question to you, Clifford. You talk about evolution versus creationism. Have you ever considered both of the two mechanisms, both creation and evolution? That God, let us take the hypothesis that he created the mechanisms of nature and of physics that made a Big Bang possible?
I have no problem with the Big Bang.
No, but I'm talking about that. Imagine that things can evolve and change and mutate and adapt to their environment. We know that does occur. So that is a God-designed thing. And if we look at evolution, ignoring the very, very long time scales, then I think evolution and creationism can be combined without any conflict, in my personal faith. And I'm a little bit concerned when you say that if it's either or for you, because you're saying both of these things are ultimate insistence on their way and only their way. And the way I view the Bible is a spiritual book that describes, I think as Simone also says, our relationship to the divine. The Bible speaks in pictures and metaphors. It does not speak in science.
Well, again, that's sort of the whole point of everything here. I obviously don't. I guess again, it comes down to why would we, if it's a metaphor, let's take, for example, and again, cut me off when I go too long because I could go on forever on this. Let's take the parable of the sower. There was a parallel there between the metaphor, the image, and then ultimately what it was about. Jesus gave us with that how to explain, how to interpret that. So anyway, the struggle I have is, even in the broadest reading of evolution, it's randomness, okay? Randomness. And you read Genesis, God said and it was so. God said and it was so. In the broadest reading of evolution, it's one single ancestor in Genesis. And God said, each one after its own kind. In other words, as I said before, if it's true, God sure did one pretty bad job of explaining it to us in Scripture. I'm not God. I could have done a whole lot better job. He's given some account that was somewhat jived with it instead of just, it contradicts it at every level. That's one of the problems I have. The other problem is I just don't believe evolution is true. Okay. I just don't think it. All right. Anyway. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Now, David, I've got Matthew who has not asked a question yet, and then we're running out of time. And then I've got
this is fun.
Dr. Boskovic. I'm going to take Matthew for sure, and then you tell me what to do with Dr. Boskovic.
Why don't we take Matthew and then have our benediction and close, as it is our custom to leave the Zoom on, so those who want to continue informally may, as long as they want. But I think that Cliff should feel that he's fulfilled his promise to us, and the rest of us may conclude at this point, or we can stay on if we want.
Okay, so let's go to Matthew. Matthew, are you here in California or in New England?
I am actually in California. I'm in Escondido right now.
Okay, good thing you're not in New England today.
Yes, yes,
Haven.
I have some friends who are over there, and I hope they're hanging in tight.
Okay.
Sorry, so apologies, I came way late, and I won't presume to touch on any issue that I think might have been done, but there is one thing that I would be curious to know from Clifford, if you would tell me. I myself, in full disclosure, I kind of live in an equilibrium where I accept the science on evolution, but theologically I can't. So, and I'm very honest with students and so forth on that. I don't have an answer for it because I think there are too many theological problems, the sorts that bother Clifford so much, that cause me less to do with like scripture and its accounts as much as the image of God, how that plays into a great controversy. So my issue is that I know of at least one Adventist professor who, as well as a small minority of other professors elsewhere, who have thought about the possibility, what if evolution is opposed to the idea of creationism, precisely because evolution might in fact be a product of the fall? And that, and if in the Adventist cosmology, the product of Satan's fall, as opposed to humanity's, so that it affected the cosmos early, so that, like cities, for example, God created us humans in gardens and so forth. The idea would be that just as God adapted Cain's descendants creating cities as the home of humanity in the New Jerusalem, something that was not a part of the original plan, but God re-steers it. This would then be an example of something that, as a result of sin, skewed all of what God's intended designs for creation were, as in Genesis 1, instead leading them into the world we exist in. Now, to add one more thing to that, one element of scripture to play to what you said, Clifford, about, man, this really isn't a good account. There was a debate, seemingly, at least in my opinion as a biblical scholar, there was a debate in the Bible's times in ancient Israel between the author of Genesis 1 that was concerned to show God in complete control and sovereign, and the many accounts and echoes of another version of the story of creation in which Yahweh fought the dragons of chaos in the Great Sea and conquered his enemies in order to bring about justice and peace and creation. It possibly, if one wanted, they could see rightfully the concerns of Genesis 1's author, but then value the fact that if we viewed evolution as creation gone astray, it would make sense to think about the chaos of dragons that have no direction, that require God to break them, to bring them into order, as suggesting a sort of plan B creationism, not a creation that was as God intended. Now, I don't know what you would think of that, Clifford, as a possibility. I don't even fully know what I think of it as a possibility, but I don't know, maybe someone mentioned it, but I'd love to hear your thought.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, well, just very quickly, I've heard little bits of it before, and I'd have to sit. I really don't think I could answer intelligently without really thinking about it a little more, but I guess the difference is evolution is deemed how we were created to begin with. And it's supposedly a good thing. Evolution, and well, we're here. Evolution's a good thing. That's how we got here. And in your scenario, it's the result of the fall. I think I'd still have a hard time. So the bottom line in the end is you're saying the Genesis 1 and 2 story is not true. It's just a projection of what somebody thought it should be, and then the fall came. And if I'm reading,
just to clarify, Clifford, I wouldn't say that it's not true. What I think I would probably understand it as is this is God's relaying of what creation should have been without a fall.
Yeah, well, anyway, if none of you have ever seen Matthew's video on Walter Veith, you gotta see that video. It is unbelievable. Very good. Anyway.
Okay, I'm going to turn this over to David now. David, we are to you.
Okay, thank you, Clifford, and thank you, Forrest, and thank you, Monty and Bronman, everybody, for making this possible, and thank you for all of your participation. We will leave the Zoom on. I recommend that we conclude this and go with our Sabbath. I think we're sort of to the end of a fruitful discussion, and that we're tired. I'm speaking not only of me, but I think others are. And I think from now on, the conversation is going to go downhill. But you're welcome to stay by if you want to, as long as you want to, okay? So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right, David, I'm going to turn off the recording for
Yeah,
Zoom.
okay, good. Okay.